Some stories leave a mark, not just on those who live them, but on everyone who hears them. This is one of those stories. A marriage, a betrayal, a choice that could never be undone. Tonight, we take a deep look at a case that shocked an entire community. A story of trust shattered, emotions pushed beyond their limits, and actions that led to a truth no one saw coming. But this is not just a story about one night. It's about everything that led to it. Who were Emily and Daniel Whitmore before their lives became headlines? What drove this marriage to its breaking point? And how did one decision change everything? Stay with us. The answers may not be what you expect. It was a place where families thrived, where neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles, where the sound of waves in the distance blended seamlessly with the rhythm of everyday life. But behind the doors of one seemingly ordinary home, a storm had been gathering, one that no one saw coming. In the early hours of an otherwise unremarkable morning, authorities were called to a residence that, from the outside, looked like any other. What they found inside was something they would never forget. A discovery so unexpected, so unsettling, that even the most seasoned professionals hesitated before stepping forward. At the center of it all was a woman, Emily Whitmore. She had built a life around love, devotion, and commitment. A wife who had spent years believing she knew the man she had promised forever to. But in a single moment, that belief was shattered. The truth unraveled like a tangled thread, exposing a betrayal that ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. 3 women, 3 lives forever changed, and one husband, Daniel Whitmore, who had been keeping secrets until they could no longer be contained. This is the story of trust broken beyond repair, of choices made in the heat of discovery, and of a moment that turned a household into a crime scene. A story of love, deception, and the irreversible consequences of hidden truths. But how did it come to this? What led to an act so unthinkable that it left a community speechless? And most importantly, was there any sign, any indication, that something like this could happen? Stay with us as we unravel the complex web of events that led to one of Florida's most shocking cases. This documentary is based on thorough research and factual accounts. Viewer discretion is advised. To understand how things unraveled, we must first understand who they were before everything changed. Daniel Whitmore was well known in his community. He was ambitious, charming, and had a way of making people feel at ease. Those who knew him described him as dependable, someone who could light up a room with his presence. By all accounts, he had built a life that others admired, one that seemed steady, secure, and successful. Emily Whitmore had a very different upbringing. Raised in a household that valued tradition and resilience, she learned early on that love meant sacrifice. She carried those values into her marriage, believing that commitment could weather any storm. Her friends often spoke of her generosity, her unwavering dedication to family, and the way she seemed to place others before herself. When Daniel and Emily met, it felt like fate had played its hand. Their love story was one that many envied, built on shared dreams, long conversations, and an unshakable belief in each other. From the outside, they had it all. A beautiful home, a seemingly unbreakable bond, and a future that held nothing but promise. But no marriage is without its challenges. And behind closed doors, there were signs, small, almost imperceptible cracks that, at the time, seemed like nothing more than the usual struggles of any relationship. Late nights at work, conversations that felt a little shorter than before, a shift in tone, barely noticeable at first. The kind of things that, on their own, might not seem like much, but when pieced together, tell a very different story. What Emily didn't know was that Daniel had been keeping something from her, and when the truth finally surfaced, it set off a chain of events that no one, not even those closest to them, could have predicted. Daniel Whitmore had always been known as a social man. His job required long hours, business trips, and networking events. He was charismatic, well-spoken, and carried himself with confidence. To those around him, he was seen as a dedicated professional, someone who worked hard to provide for his family. But there was another side to Daniel, one that few people truly saw. Somewhere along the way, the lines between business and personal life became blurred. The late nights became more frequent, The unexplained absences grew longer. And the truth? It was hidden in plain sight. The women Daniel became involved with were not strangers. Each one had a connection to him, either through work, social circles, or mutual acquaintances. They were women he saw often, women who trusted him, women who, like Emily, believed in the words he spoke. One worked alongside him, sharing late nights in the office. Another was a friend of the family, someone who had been to their home, sat at their table. The third? A woman Emily had met only once, in passing, unaware that her life was about to be entangled in something much bigger than a simple introduction. None of them knew about the others. Not at first. Each believed they had something real with Daniel. And when the truth started to unfold, it wasn't just Emily who would be left reeling. For Emily, the realization came in small pieces. A misplaced receipt. A phone left unlocked. A conversation that didn't quite add up. Each moment on its own seemed insignificant, but together, they painted a picture she could no longer ignore. The final confirmation came not through whispers or rumors, but through undeniable proof. A single message, a name she recognized, a conversation that should have never happened. The words on the screen were clear. The meaning behind them even clearer. The confrontation that followed was not immediate. Emily took time to process, to think, to question everything she thought she knew. And when she finally stood before Daniel, when she spoke the words she had rehearsed in her head, the air in the room shifted. What was said in that moment only they would ever truly know. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. Word of Daniel's affairs did not stay within the walls of their home. News spread quickly, reaching friends, family, even strangers who had never met them but suddenly felt invested in their story. Some defended him, saying mistakes happen. Others stood by Emily, unable to imagine the depth of her betrayal. But the opinions of outsiders did not change one simple fact. A marriage that had once seemed unbreakable was now falling apart. And the choices made in the days that followed would lead to consequences no one could have foreseen. Emily Whitmore did not act right away. The days after her discovery were filled with silence. She moved through her home as if trapped in a life she no longer recognized. The walls that once felt safe now held secrets she could not escape. Daniel carried on as if nothing had changed. He went to work. He answered calls. He lived his life. But inside the home he shared with Emily, something was different. The air was heavier. Conversations were shorter. The warmth that once filled their space had disappeared. Then, one night, everything reached a breaking point. The exact details of what happened that night are still debated. What is known is that Daniel never left the house again. Emily later told investigators that she had no plan, that what happened was not something she had thought about before. But others were not so sure. There were things that did not add up. Decisions that suggested something more than just a sudden moment of anger. Some say she acted on impulse, that the weight of betrayal pushed her beyond reason. Others believe she had already made her choice long before that night arrived. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found a home that no longer felt like a home. The space that once held laughter and love was now a place filled with questions. The evidence told a story, a struggle brief but intense, objects out of place, signs that whatever happened was not over in an instant. But the most unsettling discovery was not the scene itself. It was what was missing. Daniel Whitmore was gone, and Emily Whitmore was the only one left to explain where he had gone. The first sign that something was wrong came when Daniel Whitmore failed to show up for work. At first, his absence didn't raise much concern. Colleagues assumed he was sick or handling personal matters. But when the hours stretched into an entire day with no response to calls or messages, questions began to surface. Then a call was made. A friend, concerned by Daniel's sudden disappearance, reached out to authorities. He had always been reliable, never the type to miss obligations without a word. The concern only grew when attempts to contact Emily resulted in vague answers and nervous pauses. When officers arrived at the Whitmore residence, Emily answered the door. She appeared calm, her voice steady. She told them Daniel had left town for personal reasons. But something about her tone, something about the way she stood in the doorway, gave them pause. The home was neat, too neat, the kind of careful order that felt unnatural. And yet, there were inconsistencies. The bed was unmade. A suitcase sat by the door, but nothing suggested a planned trip. There were no packed clothes, no missing essentials. The officers asked to look around. Emily hesitated before stepping aside. As investigators moved through the house, small things began to stand out. A faint stain, barely visible but present. A scent, unfamiliar yet lingering. A missing rug, a misplaced cleaning product, a trash bin emptier than expected. Each piece on its own could be explained, but together they formed a picture no one wanted to see. Then the discovery was made. Evidence left behind told a story that words could not. Forensic testing confirmed what authorities feared. This was no missing person case. This was something far more serious. Emily was questioned again. This time, her answers were not as steady. Her hands fidgeted. Her words came slower. Details shifted. The arrest did not come immediately. Authorities needed more. They watched, listened, gathered what they could. And when enough pieces were in place, they returned. Emily Whitmore was taken into custody. The woman who once stood by Daniel's side now sat across from investigators, facing questions she could no longer avoid. Her story was about to unfold. The case of Emily Whitmore was one that drew attention far beyond the quiet streets of her neighborhood. The details of what happened inside her home had already been dissected by investigators. But now, it was time for a different kind of judgment. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. Family, friends, reporters, all waiting to hear what would be revealed. Some had come for answers, others for justice, and some simply out of curiosity, drawn to the story that had shaken an entire community. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out their case with precision, using every piece of evidence collected. The inconsistencies in Emily's statements, the forensic findings, the timeline that left little room for doubt. They painted a picture of a woman who had reached her breaking point, not in a moment of rage, but through careful, deliberate choices. A woman who, after discovering her husband's betrayal, had decided there was only one way forward. Then came the defense. Her legal team argued that she had acted not out of calculation, but out of desperation. That years of emotional strain, followed by the ultimate betrayal, had pushed her into a state of mind where reason no longer guided her actions. Some expected an insanity plea, but that was not the path taken. Instead, her attorneys leaned on another argument: self-defense. They claimed that on the night of the incident, an argument had escalated beyond control, that Emily had acted in fear rather than intent. The jury listened. Some took notes. Others sat still, their expressions unreadable. One by one, those who knew the Whitmores stepped forward. Friends who had seen their marriage from the outside. Colleagues who had worked alongside Daniel. Family members who had witnessed both love and tension within the home. Some spoke of Emily's devotion, her years of standing by Daniel's side. Others spoke of Daniel's actions, the secrets he had kept, the hurt he had caused. But in the end, it was not emotions that decided the case. It was the facts. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their decision. The courtroom fell silent as the judge prepared to speak. Emily Whitmore's fate had been sealed. The sentence was handed down. A punishment that would ensure she would never walk freely again. Whether justice had been served, whether the outcome was fair, depended on who was asked. Some believed she had acted out of pain, others out of intent. But no opinion could change the reality of what had been lost. One life was over. Another would now be spent behind bars. The story of Emily and Daniel Whitmore did not end with a verdict. The impact of what happened inside their home spread far beyond the courtroom. News outlets covered every development. Discussions filled television screens, online forums, and conversations among those who had never even met them. Some saw Emily as a woman pushed to her limit. Others saw Daniel as a man who had made choices that led to devastating consequences. But no matter the opinion, the reality remained unchanged. 2 lives were destroyed, and many more were left in pieces. For those who knew the couple personally, the shock did not fade easily. Friends struggled to understand how two people they had shared meals and laughter with could end up here. Family members carried their own grief not just for the loss itself, but for the way it happened. And then there were the children, the innocent ones, the ones who had no part in the choices that were made, yet would live with the consequences for the rest of their lives. What does it mean to grow up knowing a parent is gone forever? To know another sits in a prison cell? To carry a name that will always be linked to something tragic? These were the questions no court ruling could answer. Psychologists and sociologists examined the case from every angle. The role of betrayal, the weight of secrecy, the unpredictable ways emotions can lead people to actions they never imagined themselves capable of. What drives a person past the point of no return? Was this an isolated tragedy, or a reflection of deeper issues within relationships, trust, and control? Some said Emily was a warning, a reminder of how deeply pain can take root. Others saw her as a cautionary tale about letting emotions dictate actions. With time, the media moved on. Another headline, another story. But for those who were left behind, the weight of what happened never faded.